Hello, this is DJ Chuang, and today I am sitting with Adrian Pei, who is the author of a brand new book, The Minority Experience, and he'll give you the full title and the whole background. But let's start with, who are you, Adrian, and why did you write this book?
Well, first of all, DJ, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it, and love everything you've done to promote, Asian American leadership and a lot of different multi-ethnicity. And so I appreciate your work. As far as who I am, I'm a second-generation Chinese American Christian. My parents grew up in Japan and Vietnam, so I guess you wrote the book Multi-Asian Church, and so I guess I'm multi-Asian background. What do you want to call it? In terms of work, I work in the field of organization development. So that's really doing strategic work to make organizations more healthy and effective. That could be consulting, improving human resources processes, creating content, whether it's core values or training, and so on. So that's kind of my work. And you asked why I write this book?
Yes, why did you write this book? Because writing a book is a long project, like 18 months or something. How
Yeah.
long did it take you, and what prompted you to write it?
Yeah. So it's, as you said, it's been a couple years in the making, and I would say what motivated me was that, throughout my years of working for majority white organizations, growing up in the US, I found there's a lot of resources on cross-cultural competency and cultural
Hmm.
intelligence. And so things like learn about communication styles, direct, indirect, ethnic customs,
Hmm.
and I found that those were helpful, but they didn't speak to some of the critical realities that I experienced over the years, whether it was battling self-doubt, insecurity,
Hmm.
feeling pressure to change who I was, to fit in
Hmm.
to the group or with friends even socially, feeling weary of having to explain myself or work harder to prove myself. So there's all the feeling invisible in groups of people. So there were all these
Hmm.
emotional realities that I was experiencing, and it wasn't about head knowledge. And so those are the factors that I found in my experiences really wore in minorities over the years, whether it was ethnic minorities or women. And I heard those same things from people I was working with, that these are things that
Hmm.
really were critical challenges. And then I saw when I was reading, books about minority autobiographies and history books, I saw a lot of the same themes. And so I thought it could be helpful to maybe write them down in a way where people would have language to explain their feelings, and then also categories to explain their experiences and the emotional realities of things. Um, the other motivation that I wanted to draw attention to was the power gap between majority and minority cultures.
Hmm.
And one thing that I've noticed is that, very often in cultural competency or inclusion initiatives, whatever you want to call it, I found what ends up happening is that the playing field kind of gets leveled in some way or another. And it can be very subtle and kind of innocuous, but I find that we end up talking about how everyone has a culture and we just need to understand each other
Hmm.
better, communicate more sensitively, hear each other's stories. And those are all good things, right? But
Hmm.
often I think we miss the glaring reality that there's tension and pain, obviously, in the conversation about race in the United States, right? Or anywhere. And a lot of that is because people are not on equal ground.
Hmm.
There's power gap. There's injustices from history, whether we're conscious of it or
Hmm.
not. And so I really wanted to kind of call out the minority experience specifically, not just ethnicity. So like
Hmm.
what it's like to be a minority in a majority culture, to face that unique and additional layers of pain when you have less societal power or when you're dealing with the wounds of past history. So that's how I came up with the categories of pain, power, and the past. To really, I felt like that gave voice to specifically the minority experience in a dominant culture. So
Hmm.
a little background.
Hmm.
So.
Well, it's a really hard thing to uh, put the finger on, this thing called power,
Mm,
because we're in this majority culture that's mostly white,
hmm
and power we don't talk about very much.
hmm
So it's almost like this invisible force.
mm,
And
hmm
in some ways it is,
hmm
but it's also a relational force, and it
mm,
does affect how we relate to each other, and how we lead, or how we follow, or how we give our input.
hmm
Do you have a story that could help people understand the difference between a majority having power versus a minority not having power?
Yeah, and I think that that's a great question you brought up, which is that very often, as you said, power is very invisible to people who have it. And, and there's many layers to it. So it's like, in some ways I recognize that I have power in certain ways that, say, a woman wouldn't. So,
Hmm.
when I think about, okay, so I'll give a personal example for myself from that standpoint, and then kind of as a minority, how I kind of lack some power. So
Hmm.
for me, I think about the fact that for my whole life, I haven't had to think about what it's like for women who have come into a workplace setting or a job interview feeling like they have an extra more to prove themselves to fit into that culture, which is very often male dominated. So one thing that I've noticed is that there was one time that I was writing like a web series for one of my projects in the past decade or so. And I noticed that after like the first 3 articles that I did, they were all featuring men. And I didn't even think about it. I didn't even think about it. I was just like, oh, that's just is my default. And then I realized, wait a minute, there's no women. And I realized that it's so easy for me to default to what I was thinking because, I'm a man and because the environment was very male dominated. So for me, like I had to kind of get shocked to kind of realize there's, the women were not being represented if I didn't pay attention to that. Just like, women are what, over 50% of the
Hmm.
population. And yet
I
they
would
have,
hope so.
what's that? Sorry?
I would hope so. 50%
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. But, so numbers are even, but the demographic percentages are even, but there's a big imbalance there if you think about it in terms of like, how many leadership positions have they had, or, not, this is not about politics, but how many top leadership in the United States have we had for women? It's not even close to men, right? So you look at that and you realize that there's a gap there. Now, that being said, just because I'm a male does not mean that there's not disadvantages I have that the white people have. So I have friends, I have a friend who went, a white friend, who went to go teach in Asia. And, he's there and, he doesn't have to learn, the Asian languages. He
Uh-huh.
speaks English there. He said they treat him like a rock star there, and it's
Mm.
like, and so there's something there where he has an advantage there, in terms of the way that, I don't have to learn another language. I don't have to wrestle with, whether they accept me or not. So that's kind of the advantage that a white person might have, for example, compared
Mm.
to a minority. So that's kind of, I don't know if that answers, but that's kind of a couple thoughts.
No, but you've really opened that conversation through your book, and giving many examples as well as historical accounts of the minority experience beyond just yourself
Mm-hmm.
as a Chinese American, but also you tap into African American history,
Mm-hmm.
some of the social justice movements, some of the
Mm-hmm.
organizational dynamics and diversity things.
Mm-hmm.
So it does cover a lot of ground in the book, and
Mm-hmm.
I haven't read every single word, but I have read every chapter,
Mm-hmm.
and I found it to be a very personal account.
Mm-hmm.
And you really put yourself out there, and I hope that will relate well to the readers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, books being the way they are, from what I understand, publishers usually edit it down to the essence of the big idea to engage the most people possible.
Mm-hmm.
And often authors have a little more to say that didn't quite make the final cut.
Mm-hmm.
So, what was an extra chapter that you would have liked to have published or written in addition to what is there now?
Yeah, I love that question. And and I would say that, and to your point, I really did want this to be a book that incorporated the foremost experts on race and identity in the secular and faith-based worlds, so that people could get an introduction to the issues, and then those who are more familiar and competent, there would be historical examples of lesser-known stories, and then modern-day examples like the national anthem protests, Constance Wu's in the book, Meghan Markle, Black Lives Matter, and so on. As far as, so those things did make it. What things that didn't make it, I had written a chapter on the emotional experience of helplessness,
Oh,
kind of summarized by the internal question of, can I really do anything about this?
hmm.
Um, it kind of, minorities often, it's kind of like there's a Japanese phrase I use in the book, which is not my phrase, obviously, but shikata ganai, which is translated as it can't be helped.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of that feeling of like, wow, these are these forces that are happening. Can I really change it? But after some reflection, I felt that it was very similar to the chapter 4, which is about weariness in the book.
Okay.
And I also didn't want to convey the idea that minorities really are helpless, when in fact they're very strong and competent, and they've shaped society and culture in many major, huge ways throughout history, from the margins. And if you happen to be a Christian, you know that operating in the margins of society is actually quite a powerful position, according to the kingdom of God. Meek shall inherit the earth, the last shall be first, and so on. So that's kind of that extra chapter.
Well, cool. I hope you have an opportunity to release that in some format, whether it's an ebook or at your website, or if the publisher could make a bonus chapter out there, that would be really awesome. Because I think the word helplessness relates to people in a much deeper and resonates more than even the word weariness. So I really appreciate that key word and what it connects and triggers with even me just hearing that.
Okay, yeah. It's good.
Yeah.
Good to know. Thanks.
And so the book's been published now, released. What kind of reactions are you hearing? Any pushback? Any celebrations?
I haven't heard a lot of pushback yet, but I expect that to happen. I mean, it's a polarizing topic. I get that, and I wrote that knowing that fully well. And I think that's probably healthy that there's pushback, because to write anything significant, you should get pushback, and that doesn't mean it's not successful. It means that there's the right kind of things that people are processing, and it's not all about me. I believe that everybody has their own journey with grace, and if they happen to be faith-based, then it's their journey with God. And so I welcome being part of that. And if it's through them processing things in their anger or their sadness or whatever it is, or their frustration, then that could be a healthy thing, actually. So I expect that to happen, even though I haven't heard too much of it yet. The two dominant reactions that I've been hearing are, first, minorities saying that they now have words to explain what they've been feeling. So whether that's struggles from their childhood or in their organization. And then it's actually interesting, because it's kind of a similar message I'm hearing from majority culture readers. They're actually saying that the book is giving them eyes to see things they hadn't seen before, like what it's like to be a minority in the country or function in their organization. The second thing that reaction that I've been hearing is that the book has been healing and hopeful for people. And so it's interesting because, I would say the source material for the book kind of came from a sort of journal that I kept throughout the past couple of decades. I'm kind of a heart in my sleeve kind of guy, so I write in a raw way when I journal. I just put everything out there, my feelings, my insecurities, my struggles, my frustrations, my anger, my grief, all that stuff. And obviously most of the world never saw that, fortunately for them. But occasionally I would share a part of that journal during like a leadership gathering or when I was invited to share. And when I did that, I found that the minorities in the room were often in tears after hearing my stories and feelings. And I discovered that was because hearing me tell my story was actually healing for them. It was healing for me, but it was healing for them. And there's something about, I don't know, maybe it's something about the truth being told or naming pain in reality that can heal people, I think, and maybe give people real hope, not false hope. And so I think, and conversely, of course, if we avoid pain and we don't face or call out reality or pain, maybe it could stunt our growth in some ways. So that's kind of the other reaction I've been hearing, is that it's been healing and hopeful for people.
Wow, that's wonderful. That is wonderful to hear. And I'm not sure how it fits in organizational culture, but there's a humanness to what you're bringing out in this book and these stories about pain. Pain isn't something that usually shows up on a quarterly report or on the PowerPoint. Right.
Yes.
And the things that organizations seems to be very focused and intent on working on. And yet I think you're bringing this other layer to, well, how do we work together well and in a way that's not damaging, in a way that's positive, and some other language that you might use in the business context.
I really appreciate that. And that's actually really an astute point you made, which is that, I think one of the challenges we can all face in the organizational reality is that we really can dehumanize the process a little bit. And that's not intentional. It's not usually malicious or intentional, but it's just, people get overwhelmed by kind of these forces, these organizational forces that are kind of faceless in some ways. I think it's very tempting to blame an organization, a leader, because it's so easy to do that, kind of say it's on them. And yet there's these forces that are a lot more broad to kind of to simplify people's processes, to kind of go towards ease, what's easiest. And I think you're right that like I see in organizations, you know, throughout many different organizations I've worked with, is that you have that tactical side. It goes to tactics very easily, and kind of like how, pragmatism, like how do we increase the numbers, the number count, without looking at really the number one, like, okay, the leaders that we are actually trying to develop and trying to recruit who are diverse, for example, you know, do they really represent the fullness of that culture? You know,
Mm-hmm.
and I think, you know what I mean. It's not that kind of, you know, cosmetic diversity, which Daniel Lee mentions in the book. I quote him in the book, but really just this sense of the deeper side of the qualitative of these leaders. You know, are they really truly leaders who are fostering environments that are safe for people who are diverse and for different kinds of mindset and for minorities? And then also the component of like the justice component, the dignity component. I think that in the Christian world, you get that a bit, the faith-based world, where you have the whole like, you know, do we reflect the image of God better and that kind of thing. But, you know, and outside of the faith-based world, you hear more dignity, you know, and kind of like business competitive advantage, that kind of stuff. But I think you're right. That justice is kind of can kind of be swept under the rug a little bit. Like there are justice issues here about things that have happened in the past, or lack of representation and things like that. And that's why I think of reactions like, you know, Crazy Rich Asians, you know, you have that movie, and such an emotional reaction from a lot of people. That feeling of like, wow, you know, like it's been a long time coming to have this representation, you know. And DJ, I don't know, I imagine you might have heard of Slanted Screen, that there's a documentary kind of that was done about, you know, how like Asian American men in the movies and how they're kind of, you know, often portrayed as the bad guys. So really kind of like, this is kind of in some ways kind of a really a big shift from that with this movie. And, you know, there's more representation now, even though representation is not everything, but there's an emotional power behind that of kind of like, wow, there's finally something there. So that's just,
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate your comment there.
Well, thank you. Thank you for writing the book, and we're excited for you and how it will open up conversations that bring hope and healing personally to those who are minorities, as well as organizations, so that people can be healthy while they work on hard things in accomplishing goals and results in that world. So what's next for you, Adrian? This is a huge milestone. You're an author now. Will you become a speaker and a consultant and some other things?
Well, yeah. I mean, gosh, I always have, you know, ideas and things that I want to do. I'm always learning from every experience that I have. I do think that it's kind of healthy to try to rest, you know, try to celebrate. Good. You know, I think, you know, we often can go from one thing to another, and I want to show gratitude to everyone who helped it to happen. So including you and a lot of other people. So I think that that's kind of, I definitely want to make sure I do that. I do think that, you know, definitely I'll be, you know, appearing on, you know, different podcasts and, you know, doing some speaking and consulting as well. I mean, I do have a full-time job and a part-time job, so that's keeping me busy too. And, you know, in addition to family responsibilities. But I mean, I'm really grateful. I love the opportunities that I'm getting. I do feel that one unique thing about the minority experience maybe is that I write from the perspective of someone who's currently working in both ministry and corporate environments. And so in some ways I'm getting a perspective on how both those worlds kind of approach leadership, organization development, and so on. And if I were only in ministry, I'd only see one part of that, you know, of how people see the world. So, you know, my desire is really that I needed to understand another perspective so I could have a fuller view of human beings. And so that being in both really helps for that. So in the future, I see myself using those experiences in both ministry and corporate environments to do combination of probably consulting, writing, coaching, supporting other people, you know, through what they're doing and their efforts and initiatives, really in many ways, doing other creative work. I definitely have at least one more book in me. I've always loved movies and television. Would love to get a chance to either write or have a producing or consulting role in that world. I don't know if we'll see what happens.
Cool.
Some thoughts.
Well, thanks for making that wish, and perhaps someone watching or listening to this will reach out to you and make that dream come true. Adrian, thank you so much. How can people get in touch with you if they'd like to hear more and directly contact the author?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at Adrian Pay, and then my website is adrianpay.com, and yeah, the book is at minoritybook.com. So really appreciate it, and thanks, DJ. Really appreciate your taking the time.
Wonderful. Great talking with you, Adrian Pay, the author of a brand new book titled The Minority Experience Navigating Emotional and Organizational Realities. Thank you for listening and watching.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, CJ.